Good morning, good morning. Good to see you this morning. Glad to gather together as we share in our time of worship together. I believe, Matt, are we live stream too this morning? So we're on. If you're live streaming, joining us this morning or watching at a later time, we're glad that you are with us too. I learned last week that unless you use the microphone on live stream, you can't hear me. So maybe that's good for some people, but I hope this morning it's not. I'm excited as we continue our series on discipleship that we had a great week last week with Tom Laney as we looked at kind of the history of the church, of starting more as an institutional church, moving to an attractional church, and to our call today to be a missional church. That God's church has a mission. God's church has a mission, and that mission is for us to continue the work of Christ together. So today, David Kabikoff from Golden Cross Senior Ministries is here to share with us on how we tell our story. What is our story? What is our faith story? And how do we connect that story to other people's lives in their hearts as they seek to share their story, where they are and who in relation to Christ and the gifts that God has given them? How do we tell it comfortably and how do we tell it confidently? If you've ever heard David speak before, David, your enthusiasm, your engagement, your passion, I'm excited to hear your story. And I've heard several times, or different times, the stories, but he always captivates you. And so I hope this morning we'll be captivated not just by his story, but be inspired by the stories that we have been gifted to tell, and we'll go and tell it. So David, come tell your story.
What a terrific introduction. Thank you so much, Wade. When Wade called me a few weeks ago and said, would you be a part of our discipleship month, I said, absolutely. So what does a guy from Golden Cross have to do with storytelling? Well, I do tell a lot of stories as it comes to Golden Cross and the people that we are able to assist. But I also, in my spare time, which my wife always laughs about, I've been a trainer for the Dale Carnegie courses for over 40 years. And Dale Carnegie, if you're familiar, is a interpersonal communication program. So telling stories is all about what we're talking about. So we're going to talk a lot about communication today. Now, before we move any farther, if you brought something to write on, would you please pull it out, get your writing utensil. Here's what I'd like for you to do. Here's your first assignment in our time together. Would you please write the number 2 somewhere handy and circle it. If you don't have one, keep that number 2 in the back of your mind. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Tom did a great job last week. I had a chance to listen in. And by the way, those of you that are live streaming, welcome. These instructions are for you as well. You're at home, so find something to write on and write the number 2 down. We'll use it a little bit later. Tom talked about the history of the church, as Wade talked about, but he also talked about missional discipleship. Now, discipleship is one of those big religious words that causes fear in people's hearts. Doesn't it? I see all the heads nodding. Well, here's what we're going to do today. If this is okay with you, we're going to make discipleship a little bit easier. Because storytelling is really what discipleship is all about. Now, interesting thing about missional discipleship, I heard Tom use the phrase relationships an awful lot. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper in that today when we talk about what storytelling is all about. Webster describes stories as an account of incidents and events. Now, this lady at Stanford's Business School said stories are 22 times more impactful than facts when we're conveying a message to somebody. Now, when I say the word story, some of you have kind of a wistful look because we go back in time and we think about some of our most fond memories growing up are stories, bedtime stories. Stories that we heard when we curled up next to one of our grandparents and they told stories with us. They're lasting. The easy reader books, See Dick Run and all that, those were stories. And so we've grown up with an appreciation of stories, and stories are a natural part of the human condition. Now, the oldest story that we know of occurred about 4,000 years ago. It's a story of a king, Gilgamesh. It's a fictional story. And he had a mortal enemy that he combated with his entire life, and one day they became friends. It was found on a clay tablet in a rock. So stories have been around quite a bit of time. Jesus told stories. How many of you have a favorite parable that Jesus told. I see a lot of nodding heads. There were 36 of them, as a matter of fact. In fact, there's some scholars that said that about 1/3 of his teaching was in the concept of stories. Now, I want to read to you an article from Harvard Business Review titled, "Why Your Brain Loves Good Storytelling." Here's what the author said. As social creatures, we depend on others for our survival and happiness. A decade ago, my lab discovered that a neurochemical called oxytocin is a key "it's safe to approach others" signal in the brain. Oxytocin is produced when we are trusted or show a kindness, and it motivates cooperation with others. It does this by enhancing the sense of empathy and our ability to experience others' emotions. Now, let's talk about discipleship for just a second before we go a little bit deeper. Jesus said, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit." But I highlighted one important word here. You can't do this sitting on your couch. You can't do this sitting in your easy chair. You can't do this in the comfort of your comfort zone. You have to go. You have to extend yourself. Now, one of the ways we can do that and to begin to become better storytellers is to begin thinking in terms of pictures. Here's what I mean by that. If I said the word car, show of hands, how many of you would see the letters in your mind, C-A-R? A couple of you, okay. How many of you would see the picture of a car? Your neighbor's car, the car you, doggone it, you wished you had? The car that cut you off on the drive over here, but you'd see the picture of a car. That happened to you today, huh? So here's what I'm going to do. Let's practice thinking in terms of pictures, because pictures are a fundamental part of storytelling. So what I'd like for you to do is right here in the middle of the floor, I want you to picture a name tag. But there's 3 things I want you to think about when we start to think in terms of pictures. Number 1, it's got to have action in it. We prefer movies more than we do static pictures, right? Because they're more engaging and what have you. It's got to have color in it. So we're going to put color in each one of these pictures. And we got to exaggerate it, because the more bizarre it is, the better it'll stand out in our mind. Because this is actually a memory exercise, as well as thinking in terms of pictures. Okay, let me see what kind of group we've got here. How many experts at memory are there in the room? I mean, you hear it one time, it sticks with you. 6 weeks from now, you still remember it. Expert memory, you, John? Good for you. All right, we got 2. All right, how many of you have a pretty average memory? If it wasn't for being able to do a memo on your phone or write stuff down, you'd forget half the things you hear in a day. Average memories? Good, okay. All right, how many poor memories are there? I mean, it's like a sieve. It comes in, one out, okay. All right, be honest. How many of you have forgotten what the question was? Got it, okay. All right, so let's think in terms of pictures, using this memory exercise to show you the power of thinking in terms of pictures. A name badge is right here in the middle of the floor. 6-foot-long name tag. What color is it? Is the ink on it? Red ink on that. Now, jammed down in the corner of that name tag is a 2-story house. What color is that house? White house. White house, jammed down in the name tag. Now, what's the first thing in the middle of the floor? What is the first thing in the middle of the floor? Okay, here's the deal. I can see you guys are a little sleepy. If the person next to you is not responding like you know they really want to, put your elbow on their side, tap it like that, point to them. We'll get them to come up front with me and go through the list with everybody, okay? What's the first thing in the middle of the floor? It always gets louder after you make that announcement. What's the next thing? 2-story. What color is the house? White. Running all around the house, hanging out the windows, running all through the yard are hundreds of children. Parents in the room just rolled their eyes. Exploding through the shingles of the roof is a pair of 10-foot-tall work gloves. What color are they? Blue work gloves. Those work gloves are holding on to the end of a tennis racket. What color is a tennis racket? Brown tennis racket. First thing in the middle of the floor? Next. White house, good. What's next? Children, good. What's next? Blue work gloves. What's happening next? Holding a tennis racket, good. Why are some of you looking at the ceiling for the answers? Because you're doing exactly what thinking in pictures causes us to do. We're visualizing what we're creating here. Now, that tennis racket exploding through the strings is a huge jet airliner. What color is that jet airliner? Blue jet airliner, good. And on the tail of that jet airliner is a blinking light. What color is the blinking light, sir? Red blinking light. Good. What's the first thing in the middle of the floor? Good. What's next? Good. What's next? Wade, you got a sharp group here. What's next? All right, what's next? Tennis racket. Good. We forgot the children. All right. Then the gloves. Good. What's happened next? All right. Tennis racket. What's happening next? Jet airliner. What's happening next? Good, good, good. Give yourself a round of applause. Nicely done. That's okay to applaud in church. Give yourself a round of applause. Good job. Storytelling as it comes to discipleship is actually a two-step process. I believe that before we can tell our story, wouldn't it be nice to know the other person's story first? That's how you build trust. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But how do you do that? I don't know about you. How many of you love small talk? Not me. I hate it. After how's your mama and them and how about them tigers, what else do you talk about? You know what you just did? You just learned a list of questions you can ask to get to know somebody's story. What's the first thing in the middle of the floor? What kind of questions could you ask about somebody's name? The nationality of it? Is it a family name? All those questions about somebody's name. What's next? Where do you live? How long have you been there? Why'd you choose that neighborhood? Where else have you lived? See where we're going with this? What's next? Tell me about your family. How many kids do you have? Where are you in your family of origin? All the questions you could ask to get to know about somebody's family. What's next? That's obvious. Where do you work? Where did you work? What's your favorite place you worked? Where's the least favorite place you worked? What's the next thing? Not do you just play tennis? What sports do you follow? What sports do you play? What sports are you really good at? Where are you not so good at? See the questions you could ask? What's the next thing? Jet airliner. Do you travel? Where's your favorite vacation spot? Where's your least favorite vacation spot? What's next? Red light. How many of you have ever watched cartoons in your life? Absolutely. When a cartoon character has an idea, what appears above their head? Light bulb. What are your ideas about wherever we are and what our current events are, about what's happening in your life? So now you're equipped with a set of questions, and I'm not going to leave it there. Would you find a partner that is not part of your family? Do that now, go. Find a partner sitting around you that's not part of your family. Do it quickly. Now, y'all are already starting to practice. Don't practice yet. One of the partners, please raise your hand. So half the hand should go up. One of the partners, please raise your hand. You're going first. Use this set of questions you've just learned to get to know your partner. Look how easy it's going to be. Ready? Go. Time, please. Time, please. Invariably, when I go through this exercise with a group, I get real ugly looks when I call time, please, on the exercise, because it's enjoyable, wasn't it? How many of you found something interesting that you didn't know before about the person? Why did that happen? Because you just asked. Because you just took the time to ask. Folks, I've done this exercise with groups that have worked together for 20 years, side by side. And invariably, every person learns something they didn't know before. How cool is that? I believe that we are all one in a zillion. That means there's never been anybody like you, sir, ever again, and there never will be again after you. And if we're one in a zillion and everybody we encounter is one in a zillion, how many connection points does that mean we might find? How many points of interest that we find fascinating might we find if we do just what? Ask. We've got to ask questions. We've got to get to know the other person's story. Now, this time, let's do it a little bit different. If you were answering the questions, you're now going to ask the questions, so we're going to swap roles. And if you are asking the questions, here's my challenge to you. Listen as if there's going to be a test later. Because there just might be. There just might be. So, if you were listening, now ask the questions, swap roles, ready, go. Time, please. Time, please. You would think you'd know by now. You got the same ugly looks when I ask you to stop talking. Isn't it refreshing to get to know another person's story? How many of you now, again, heard something interesting that you didn't know before about the person you were talking with? What'd you hear? I'm sorry. Gotcha. John? Wow. So how long have you known John? You never heard that story before. See what I'm talking about? Exactly. Well, you did, but the most important thing is that you ask. Okay? Okay, but see, the thing is, he took the time to ask. And then he took the time to listen. We've got to do that, folks. Discipleship is a big old scary word, and it's really as simple as just getting to know somebody else's story first. And the reason we do that is that builds trust. When we just take the time to find out. Now, we started with 10 commandments, and Jesus came back and said, no, there's 2. You got it on the banner back here. But then the night before he was handed over, he said, I've got one final commandment for you. And if you were here first service, you heard it. You're going to hear it if you stay for the 11 o'clock. He said, so now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love one another. A lot of people stop right there because that's easy to digest. What's really, really hard, what really raises the bar is what he said next. Just as I have loved you, love one another. That way people will know you're my disciples. Well, yeah, but what if the other person has made bad decisions in their life? Tough, do it anyway. What if they're different from me? Tough, do it anyway. Jesus chose to love every one of us, no matter how broken, no matter how messed up, no matter how off target we were. And that's what he meant by this. Not just love one another, but love one another as he loved us. And that puts on a whole new meaning of discipleship and why we should take the time to get to know somebody else's story. Because we build trust when we do that. And trust turns into satisfying the hunger to be heard. One of the greatest desires in all of human natures, ladies and gentlemen, is the desire to be heard. You may give that other person an opportunity to be heard that they've never had before. And that builds trust. You also give others' lives meaning if you care enough to ask them questions to find out about who they are and why they want it. We're going through all this because we've got to build trust before we tell our story. And we're going to get to telling your story first, but I wanted to make sure you understood it was a 2-part transaction here. And lastly, it facilitates meaningful connections with another person. All of that's a prerequisite before we tell our story. So let's talk about telling our story. There's 2 parts to telling your story. First is preparation. How many of you would want to tell your story if it meant eternity for another person shooting from the hip? No, we want to prepare. So we want to prepare, and we want to plan ahead, and we want to find the right story. I submit to you that every person in this room has multiple faith stories you could share with somebody. I've got a faith story. My wife had a fight with breast cancer, one of the most aggressive, fast-growing breast cancer. We prayed fervently, asked everybody we knew to pray as well, and God bless her, today she's cancer-free. That's just one of the faith stories I have. Every one of us has multiple faith stories. We've got to find the right one, and we're going to talk about that. How about planning ahead? First of all, doesn't it make sense, before we're going to start telling our story, to decide what it is we want to accomplish by telling the story that we're going to share with somebody? Also, why? What do we want to accomplish, and why do we want to accomplish it? Next, what's in it for our listener? And this may be the most important part. So and we're going to construct our story before we leave today so that we're prepared to share it. But here are the 3 things to think about as we plan ahead. What do we want to accomplish? Why do we want to accomplish it? And lastly, what's in it for the person we're sharing with it? So many times we get twisted about discipleship because we think it's all about us. Ladies and gentlemen, let me submit to you, it becomes much easier when we put the other person first and we start to tell our story. So how do we pick the right story? When did you first know you believed? What did you have to overcome? Every one of us, when we reached that decision to believe, had to overcome something. Doubt, fear, past experiences. We had to overcome something. What kind of feelings did you have? That's the empathy that article was talking about before. Sharing feelings with another person is an indelible way to tell our story. And lastly, what's been the lasting impact? What has continued for you once you lived through that story? Now, there's a classic construction of stories. Look it up. It's amazing to me as I got ready, Wade, to make this presentation, the volumes of information out there about the concept of story and storytelling. Here's the classic concept. You got to first say the setting. When did it happen? What conflict was there? And what was the resolution to that conflict? Now, this is all about the content of our story. But what about how we tell it? UCLA did a study. Over 10,000 data points went into the story. It was a 10-year study. They wanted to find out what makes an impact on communication. Believe it or not, only 7% was on the words that were being used. 38% was on the tone of voice. 55% of it had to be based on nonverbal communication. How you looked. Were you leaning forward? Did you look engaging? Were your arms crossed, or were you loose and open to the other person? Did you have a smile on your face or a frown? Were you too intense in the way you looked at it? So be mindful of the way you look as you're telling your story. Here's 5 L's I'd like for you to consider. First of all, language. Did you know that insurance companies are required by federal law to write their documentation at the 6th grade level? Why? To make it easy for as many people as possible to understand it. So please consider your language when you're putting your story together. Don't use big church words like discipleship and whatever. Make it easier for the other person to digest. Next, be mindful of the length. How many of you ever had someone tell you a story and they went on and on and on? Okay? Well, be brief. Be impactful. Be motivational and inspirational. Well, be brief. Third L, be likable. Make it easy for somebody to digest. Next L is have a lesson involved, something in it for the other person. And lastly, have some lasting impact for it. Those are the 5 L's that will help you construct your story, which we're going to be doing in just a moment. So, what is your story? Take a moment, because you have a chance to practice sharing your story with your partner that you were with just a moment ago. I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to think about your story based on the content that we went through before, and have the opportunity to share your story, to practice it before you go out on the street and do it. Ready? 4 minutes on the clock, go. If you want me to go back to a slide that was previous in this session, to let me know which one you want to go back to. If you didn't have a chance to take notes, and I'd be happy to do it. Construct your story. The 5 L's? Okay. There you go. This is not a group project. This is an individual project. You're creating your own story that you're going to have a chance to share with your partner in just a moment. I'll go back to that one. Yeah. This is your faith story. You could do this for any other story, but where we're going at the end of this, it needs to be your faith story, because what's going to happen is you're going to be challenged to go out and share your story with other people. So here's your time to prepare it. Your faith story. When did you first believe? What emotions did you feel? What did you have to overcome? What's in it for your listener? Time, please. The amount of conversation means that you must be ready to go. But show of hands, how many of you remember when this story took place in your life? The occurrence, where you were, who else was there, and what have you. Here's what thinking in terms of pictures does for you. Don't write your story out. Don't memorize your story. If you memorize your story, you sound just like somebody who's memorized a story. See the picture in your mind of what took place and what happened to you and how you felt, and then just tell people, narrate that picture to the person you're talking to. It's as simple as that. If you memorize it, I promise you what's going to happen is somebody's going to cough or sneeze, you're going to lose your place, and then you don't know where to go next. All right? So that's why you just think in terms of pictures and then narrate what's taking place in that picture to the person you're talking to. All right, get with your partner. We're going to give you a little bit longer this time, and it's okay if you have questions for the person sharing their story. Please do so, because that's real life. So, are you with your partner who's not a family member? Good. Here we go. If you're not with a partner, find a couple of people and be with them and just share, okay? Here we go. One of the partners, please raise your hand. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the partners, please raise your hand. Good. The other person's going first. Tell your story. Go. Hold on. Time, please. Hold on. I press pause. You're not losing any time. If you're listening, listen as if there's going to be a test later. Tell your story. Go. Time, please. Time, please. Okay, so you had a chance to share your story. Tell me your thoughts. Was it easier? Was it tough? What was your reaction to that exercise? Anybody? Okay, and if we're going to practice, doesn't it make sense to practice with somebody you feel a little safe with before we actually go out and do it? Did you find this easier, given some of the format that we put together to share your story, than you might have thought? Good, good. Anybody else's reaction? All right, well, that's Wade's fault because he gave me a hard stop. Gotcha, okay. Well, and so you want to make sure you allow enough time as you move forward. Any other thoughts? Those of you that were listening, did you find the stories easy to digest? How come? Gotcha. Okay. Made it interesting and appealing to you as the listener. And that's the thing we got to focus on, folks, as we tell our story. We've got to be thinking about the other person, not us. It's not how we look, how we feel, how we think. It's how the other person is receiving our message. That's what's important when we're thinking about the concept of discipleship. It's not that big old scary word. It's just simply telling your story in a way that's engaging and appealing to the other person. Good. Now, if you were listening, guess what? It's your turn. Tell your story. Go. Time, please. Now that you've had a chance to tell your story, any additional reactions to the idea of sharing your faith story with another person? Yes, this is artificial. Yes, this is practice. Yes, this is safer, but it's supposed to be when you practice. You want to go full on game mode before you have a chance to trot it out. Any additional reactions to telling your story? Very good. And it makes it come to life, it makes it easier to relate, and it makes it easier to move forward telling our story after you find out someone else's story. Good. So let me ask you a question. So we've just spent better part of 45 minutes together. Does it make sense to take everything we've just practiced and talked about and put it on the shelf and say, well, that was a nice time we spent together. I don't really have to do anything. You know where this is going, don't you? Because here's the thing. I want everybody to, on the piece of paper you brought in, if not, get an offering envelope. I'm sure Wade's okay with that. Take something out to write on. Everybody, please. Let's talk about that word, that number 2 that you wrote down and circled. What you did in the very beginning is set a goal for yourself. There's about 70 people in the room right now, maybe a little bit more. If every one of us, by the end of the month, when Wade and Linda get up and finish this discipleship month, if every one of us commits to finding 2 people and finding out their stories so that we could share ours, can you imagine the impact Emmanuel United Methodist Church could have on this community? So here's what I want you to do. Right now, write down the name of 2 names of people you are going to purposely in the next 2 weeks go out and find out their story so that you can tell yours. 2 parts. Remember, you got to find their story out before you tell yours. A friend, a coworker, a neighbor, the lady at the coffee shop you stop in every other day, the pro at the golf course if you go play golf, whoever it might be. Write the name of 2 people. Even if you don't know the name, write the description of the person. 2 people's names. Please do that now. 2 people's names. You're going to go find out their story. You're going to take the time to find out their story so that you might be able to share yours. Remember, you got to find out their story to create that trust before you tell them yours. 2 people's names. Write them down now. Look this way when you've written 2 names down. Oh, good. Right hands up in the air, please. Right hands up in the air, everybody. Wade, listen very carefully. Say, I promise. So you've gotten these commitments now, Wade, that they're going to go out and find 2 people to find out their stories so that you can share your faith story with them. Can you imagine the impact this can make on the community around Emmanuel United Methodist Church? If everybody in this room fulfills the promise you just made, and the pastors in the back of the room, the impact you can make. I want to share with you something the Apostle Paul wrote to the church of Colossae. Here's what he said. Live wisely among those who are not believers and make most of every opportunity. You get it? What he's saying is, go find out their story at every opportunity. Let your conversation be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response from everyone. That's a pretty lofty goal. Find every opportunity. All I've asked you to do in the next 2 weeks is just 2. But what if you did that every 2 weeks? What would the end of the year look like? Thank you so much for your participation. Anybody have any questions, finally, as we get ready to close? Any questions about telling the story? Here's what. If you'd like a copy of the slide deck, just email me. I'm not going to put you on an email list or whatever. I'm happy to send you a PDF of these slides if it will help you to create your faith story. It is that critically important. Thank you all so much for your participation, for your action, and for your hospitality. God bless you.
Thank you, David, for sharing. Remember the name tag, the house, the children, the work gloves, the tennis rackets, the airliners, and the light. Wow. Beautiful. To picture that. I love that. Just to have that picture and telling a story and what we all can relate to. So I hope for you it was informative. I hope for you it's taught you something maybe new that we don't know. Here's the key, as he says, the 2 people. I hope in the different groups that you're a part of, or just different friendships or circles you're in, maybe practice it in those groups. Challenge yourself in Sunday school classes, Bible studies. Challenge yourself in your home group to share your stories and to share that with others, and come back and share it. I think what I would find fascinating is that we begin to hear the stories that we shared and what other people responded to. So I hope we can follow up with that in some capacity together. We'll continue to grow. Next week, Dr. Artur Eason Williams is our district superintendent, a new district superintendent. Will be speaking on entry points and engaging the community. You get it? We hear a story, we tell our story. How do we begin to share that story in the community and connect it to what's going on and what God's doing in the neighborhood around us? So, David, thank you again for your time and for your willingness. And we've got a few minutes if you want fellowship until worship at 11. If you're here early, stay again.